Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the World War II Daily Podcast. Today, we have here with us Katie Sanders, who we're going to talk about a very interesting topic related to World War II that, to me, was unknown until I met her. We're going to also talk about her book and the article she wrote a couple of years ago, and all the links you can find down here on the description of this episode. You can find us all on Instagram as well at World War II underscore daily and at Samuel.decorti, the co-host of this show, who's not here with us today, unfortunately, but you can find him on Instagram anyways. You're going to find Katie's Instagram and Ortiz's War Book Instagram also in the description of this episode. Please check it out. Very interesting story. And there you're going to get more details. So without further ado, Katie Sanders, welcome to the World War II Daily Podcast. Introduce yourself. Who are you? What you do? Talk about your work, your background, and how did you get to write about Ortiz, who we're going to learn more about later on this episode.
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks so much for having me and for sharing these stories. I love World War II history and being able to share the story of Peter Ortiz, who I would have never heard of had I not had a familial connection that I'll talk more about, is really special. And so is getting to, be part of this community where you're really bringing light to these stories that we might not otherwise know that are really important in Greatest Generation history. But yeah, I'm a journalist. My background is sort of magazines. Always been very curious, and I was especially curious when I grew up with a piece of my grandfather, who I'd never met, my mother's father, his B-24 Liberator that had been shot down over France during World War II. Here is this model of B-24CC. It's kind of dusty, but that's the cover loop, that little thing over there that covers the antenna. And so, growing up, again, didn't know my grandfather, but knew that he had been piloting this plane that, again, this is the cover loop, cool artifact, but also, sort of a mystery to me. How did we get this? And what's the story behind it? He was piloting a plane that was shot down over France a month before D-Day. He was a Jewish American pilot from Queens who was in big trouble. And when he got shot down, he was flying a secret mission. Unlike a lot of the World War II 8th Air Force stories we hear about dropping bombs, he was dropping supplies ahead of D-Day to help arm and mobilize the resistance. And he got, in a lot of ways, very lucky and ended up, I learned, connecting with some real heroes, people whose courage inspires me today in so many ways, and whose descendants I've been lucky enough to meet, including a doctor in the French underground who himself secretly a Jew, took my grandfather down, Allied airmen, into his home and smuggled him out. And eventually my grandfather ends up in the hands of Peter Ortiz. So again, you can see he's the subject of my new book, Ortiz's War, which I co-authored with Nicholas Reynolds, who is a former U.S. Marine colonel and CIA officer and historian. And yeah, it's been a real joy to be able to go deep in the story of Peter Ortiz. And we'll, of course, talk more about who he was and why I'm sharing his story.
This is amazing because this is such a part of World War II that's highly neglected. Like what was going on behind the lines, like people who
behind
were
the scenes.
okay.
Yeah.
We're gonna talk about Ortiz, but when I read the story, it was like, yeah, really, these guys were like so brave. This is like
Yeah.
the level of bravery we are not used. Of course, like disembarking in Omaha Beach, it's insane, but operating behind it. Anyways, yeah, let's get there.
Yeah.
So let's talk about Ortiz a little bit.
Yep.
Like, who was Peter Ortiz? Like,
Yeah.
why, and something interesting about it is that he was a Marine and he was
Yeah.
fighting in the Pacific, like usually
Yeah.
Marines were
Exactly.
fighting. But like, why is he such an extraordinary example of hero during the war?
There's enough material here to write a book, so I won't, I'll give you the short version. Again, like you said, Peter Ortiz was a Marine in Europe, which in and of itself was unique. But Peter Ortiz was unique. He was fluent in many languages. His father was an executive at Condé Nast who had moved to France to help start Paris Vogue. And so what you had was this guy who spoke fluent French and also happened to be very well trained in parachuting out of moving planes, and really was one of the earliest special operators in this country being the United States, where I'm sitting right now. And yeah, Peter Ortiz, my grandfather would later tell my mom, was a real life knight of the round table. He was someone who was incredibly, I think, courageous. He always thought of his nobility, that he, again, he came from a lot of privilege. He had DuPont blood. He, went to fancy schools, but he thought of it as an obligation or responsibility in the way so many members of the Greatest Generation did. And he really was pulled towards service, pulled towards adventure. And interestingly, before World War II and before he joined the Marines and the Office of Strategic Services and ended up in this unique role in Europe, he actually was in the French Foreign Legion. He joined the French Foreign Legion after running away from school in France as a teenager, to his dad's real horror, because French Foreign Legion had a rough and tough reputation, and this fancy publisher wasn't so sure that his son should be, in North Africa, in combat for France. But in fact, Peter Ortiz really came of age in the French Foreign Legion, fought in the French Foreign Legion, was a prisoner of war, escaped, was wounded. So this is someone who is not your average, 20-something-year-old profile of what you think of as a soldier or Marine. He was, in his case, a very old 30 or 31-year-old come World War II, but who did have pretty serious combat experience and language skills and all the things that made him a good fit for Wild Bill Donovan, General Donovan from World War I, who started the OSS's new clandestine organization that is now the forerunner to the CIA.
Yeah, that's the man. When I learned about it, I was like, man, this is insane.
You can't
But
make it
yeah,
up.
you will learn a lot more about Peter Ortiz when you get your hands on Katie's and Mr. Reynolds' book. You're gonna find that on our Instagrams this month. So yeah. Anyways, so let's carry on. You mentioned at the beginning of our conversation that Peter, you connected with Peter's story. Actually, his name was Pierre,
Pierre.
right? It was a
Yes,
French name. Yeah.
exactly. Mm-hmm.
So, anyways, you connected with him because of your grandfather. You even have a piece of his airplane. But can you tell us, like, how did Peter help your grandfather escape when he was shot down over France?
Yeah, it's a wild story, and one that, as I was looking at it, I was like, I can't believe this is real, and that this was only, ultimately one chapter of Peter Ortiz's life. Thankfully, it was, a chapter of my grandfather's life that allowed him to get home and be safe and live a long life and die of lung cancer many years later from all the Air Force cigarettes that he took to smoking, like so many in that time. And so my grandfather always felt very lucky that Peter Ortiz was part of his life, and turns out a lot of people did. So yeah, Peter Ortiz, again, I learned about this. There's actually a 1949 episode of the radio show, This Is Your Life with Ralph Edwards. It was the show where they would fly in, sort of a special person of the day and surprise them, recreating the story of their life, sort of trick them into coming to this set in Hollywood and do this, rundown of what made this person special. And so Peter Ortiz was on the show. My grandfather was one of the guests flown in to surprise him. So again, what you have is, for me, I'm hearing my grandfather's voice for the first time in the UCLA Film and Radio Archive, as a young journalist, and I hit play and I hear the story. And so really, this is the abridged version. Like you said, these are stories that, since they're OSS, since they're, long classified World War II kind of special ops stuff, oftentimes you don't really hear them at all. But in this case, there actually was this radio show episode from NBC. So 1949, they're recounting this, and my grandfather, is able to share some of the story publicly, which again is sort of unique from an OSS history standpoint. Although there were representations of OSS in movies like 13 Rue Madeleine, which Peter Ortiz was actually a technical advisor on, and later worked in Hollywood, sharing some war stories and adding authenticity to Hollywood representations. Anyways, back to this episode of This Is Your Life. You hear my grandfather come in, and the genuine surprise in Peter Ortiz, a couple years after the war, reuniting with this. My grandfather was a 23-year-old Jewish guy from New York City who was told, if you get shot down, you might be caught and captured as a spy, tortured, killed, so don't get shot down. And Peter Ortiz, meanwhile, is operating behind enemy lines with the same mandate of don't get caught, because you are not subject to being a prisoner of war. You are a secret agent, and Hitler's mandate is if you're found, you're killed. And that's an order. And so you have these two guys who are, not really supposed to be where they are in their lives and many lives of the people they're working with, the brave members of the French resistance, and the SOE, the British counterpart to OSS, are working really courageously in really uncharted territory. And so my grandfather, gets smuggled. It's a whole other story of how he ends up getting to Valence after he's shot down. But in Valence, these resistance say to him, don't worry, you're good. And this is like, these are women and men and children who are taking, again, enormous risk to take an Allied, an American pilot, a downed pilot, into their house. And so they say, don't worry, Ortiz is coming. Or I think they're calling him JP or Jean-Pierre Chamberlain is one of his code names. He has all these identities. He's truly James Bond secret agent level wild stories and covers and false ID cards. And so my grandfather's trying to wonder, is Chamberlain really coming? Turns out, after some misconnections, he is. This is a month before D-Day. And so he says to my grandfather, they're pleased to see each other in this context, as they recount years later on this radio show. And they say, all right, Ortiz says, you can come with me. If you're found, you'll get shot twice, once for being caught, a second time for being with me. And again, here's my grandfather, this Jewish kid who's like, this is probably my best chance. The safe house is soon to be blown, apparently. So they leave together. And Ortiz has stolen a fleet of Gestapo staff cars at this point. So again, it's really wild stuff that sounds made up, but it's not. So they leave in one of those Gestapo staff cars, which leads the German officers who are waving and saluting at the car, to think that Ortiz is some German officer, and he's sitting there waving back. And here he is in the back seat of the Gestapo staff car with my grandpa, the Jewish kid from Queens. And my grandfather's disguised as a deaf mute Frenchman named Maurice Simon instead of Maurice Simon. And they go on this, escape adventure on trains with Nazis, and through, just on a wild journey to safe houses. They end up trekking through the Pyrenees into Spain on a really arduous trek. And they get to Barcelona and then Gibraltar, and then are interrogated and make it back to England in the OSS possession, where they're both actually connected to OSS before D-Day. D-Day is 4 days later. So that's the journey, and they tell that story on this radio show episode.
Now this is a crazy story. When I read about the car and he was waving back at the SS officers, and like that's the level of bravery. Like I you talked about your grandfather. I also connect to the war because of my grandfather,
Mm-hmm.
who was an Italian armored car driver.
Yep.
His picture is somewhere here, but it's not. You cannot see. But anyways, and he also lived through some crazy stories, but not that insane. That's a level of, and it makes me think of of the scale of things of the days before D-Day, the kind of work these men did. Like when I was
Man
reading,
and
when I
woman.
was
Yeah, it's crazy.
yeah, and woman. That's true. Yes, insane, insane, insane. When I was in Portugal, I went to Portugal. Actually, this T-shirt's from the Veterans Association from there. But anyways, the Lisbon was filled with spies and pilots trying to get back to
Yep.
friendly lines. And I was like, yeah, man, this is a topic I need to cover on the show. But anyways, let's move on. So Ortiz was this. Big compilation of abilities and skills, foreigner legionnaire, marine, and everything. Multiple could speak multiple languages. From all those abilities and stories throughout your research, was there anything that when you learned about him that you were like impressed and truly like, okay, this changes everything because this guy is the real deal? Is there something there?
Yeah, I mean, continuously in our research, I think he had a lot of quirky roles, like a dude ranch manager and a stunt Hollywood guy and, a race car driver and circus performer. So again, you're finding out, again, this trivia that sounds made up. But I think what really impresses me about Ortiz is that he treats his nobility as an obligation to be, pulled towards whoever needs his help, usually vulnerable people. He essentially says, whatever Hitler does to the Jews, he's going to have to do to me. He's someone who's seen, early on through his French Foreign Legion experience, a vantage point of what is happening in World War II and really the Holocaust that most Americans, don't have access to that information. And so he really, again, he's very service oriented. He's very pulled towards action. He also was a big reader. So, this is someone who can't sit in a classroom to graduate, from his studies because he wants to be out in the field and in the world, but he loves reading. And one thing that we came across in the process of doing research for this book was Pete Jr., who's wonderful and a retired Marine aviator and history teacher himself. And he's, Ortiz's only child. And he, welcomed me into his home, into their sort of family archives. It truly is almost a library of papers and all the things that, have been recorded and kept over the years. And one of those things was a logbook of what Ortiz, in the last 10 years of his life, when he was, at this point a senior citizen, was reading. And it was really interesting to see that someone who, was again not an A+ student or really even willing to be a student at all. Made me think of people today who like really just reject school, but actually are incredibly brilliant and equipped to be in the world in important ways. And so he had noted in this logbook what books he was reading. Sometimes they were historical nonfiction where he was like, yeah, this is a little inaccurate because I was there, but it was just a really interesting window that I've been working with this guy Semper Reads is his Instagram handle to sort of digest and share some of those, this World War II secret agents later in his life reading list, because I think that, so it's surprising that he was as bookish as he was. Again, for someone who was in a lot of ways not your traditional classroom student, he was really studious, really measured. And yeah, I was always just impressed by pretty much every component of Peter Ortiz's existence. But I think seeing that he was a big reader, it's something I'm a reading nerd too. So I appreciated it all the more to be able to see into his mind that way.
That's a very interesting observation about him. I appreciate it. That's cool. Actually, I was while you were talking about it, I was thinking about one of my favorite World War II books by Ken Follett. I don't know in English. I think it's The Eye of the Needle. It's one of my favorite books. It's about spies in World War II.
I've not read it.
I almost had to go through the third year of high school here in Brazil again because of the book, because I was reading this book like over and over. My
See,
father
you're
gave
that
me,
same
but
personality where you're like, you're self-directed,
yeah,
you're engaged.
and I wasn't a great student either. It's just terrible at school. But anyways, I'm glad you mentioned that he was like not a great student, but but in the other hand, he was brilliant with the things he
Yeah.
was proposing himself to do. Do you think that there was, you know him better than anybody else here listening. So, do you think there was a method to the things he did? Like, for example, driving through a town with an SS division, like in the town, like, do you
Yeah.
think there was a method to it, or is it just like very organic from him?
I think it was a combination because, you think of the military and you think of like rank and file and real strict training. And Ortiz, again, in some ways, he really thrived in that environment. In other ways, he, would be recalled by the OSS and he'd say, instead of taking the plane that you're sending for me, I'm going to get out my own way, which was, again, very fortunate for me because that's where he intersects my grandfather because he's doesn't want to let down these people in the resistance who, their lives might depend on getting the messages that he's going to be relaying. And he, really, again, I think does operate from a place of some sense of like, here's my gut, right? But it's steeped in experience. And, again, this is a bit of the Wild West. The French resistance is made up of groups of, a very motley crew of, people who are, for very different reasons, come together to try to, mobilize and reclaim French democracy. And so Ortiz, I think, gets a little creative. And I think he really, you know, is self-guided. He is entrepreneurial almost. And most of all, he's leans into symbolism and the power of his presence, knowing that it can be more impactful than just, whatever he's been ordered to do. For example, he wears his Marine uniform. And like you said, there weren't many Marines in Europe in general, and there weren't many Allied soldiers in uniform behind enemy lines pre D-Day in France. That was like you know, not going to happen a lot. And he realized that by flashing his Marine uniform in certain contexts that we talk about in the book, it not only gave a tremendous boost, as he described it, to French resistance, who were saying this, the first person who, when the man who helped my grandfather, who's in the French resistance, saw my grandfather, said, "When is the invasion? Please tell us, please tell us." Like, these are people who are waiting for Allied soldiers and so when you only see one come and you think they're going to be a fleet, it's like, when are the rest coming? But for Peter Ortiz, I think he saw one in uniform is an incredibly powerful message for people to hold on to the hope that there's help on the way. In fact, there's some help already here, and they're not scared. They're not standing down to the Nazis who are occupying the area and ready to, kill them. So Ortiz was using sort of these early guerrilla tactics of intimidation and propaganda and like unconventional warfare as we know it today, that really, does start in a lot of ways with the OSS and SOE, in order to bolster morale, in order to, it wasn't just like you're stealing a Gestapo staff card because that's going to be the most convenient way to get out. It would help. But it was also, who is this, American Marine who's stealing our cars? He was driving them nuts.
Yes, and it brings me to what I talked about with you a couple of, I think, last week, that it somehow brings me to Inglorious Bastards,
Yeah,
kind of psychological. No, he wasn't a
totally.
ruthless
No, no, no.
murderer like Aldo
That's
Rain,
Wait, I
but
have to
the
pause you
morale
here.
boost.
You're right,
Yeah,
because
go ahead.
so no, I'm pausing you here only because Nick, my co-author, is a CIA historian, Marine, and we have this debate a lot. I say, can I compare Ortiz to Inglorious Bastards, but a classy, more, guided in morality version? And he's like, no, like you can't, it's a Quentin Tarantino, like, bastardized movie. But I do think it's a really important cultural reference point, because people understand what you mean by bold, audacious operator. Again, he was not the crude and violent in the wrong ways part, but you're totally right. And again, Nick sort of, wants us to resist making the comparison, and I can't help but make the comparison because you're right.
Yeah, because like even the fact that he assembled a team to go with
Yes.
him, the people who I want to get to these people as well, because
Hmm.
we are talking about these James Bond kind of agent, but
Yep.
there was also combat. There was
Yeah.
also battles that he was in,
Yep.
and like tell us the story of the combat and to the
Yeah.
point where he surrenders
Hmm.
knowing he was very likely being killed for
Yeah.
espionage, and
Yes.
he decides to surrender to save the village. Can you please get us into that
For
story?
sure. Yeah, so when Ortiz intersected my grandfather, just to give people a sense of time, you're talking, he had jumped behind enemy lines before D-Day. They get back to England safely in, again, June, right before D-Day. D-Day happens, they're in England. Ortiz says, I want to go back. I need to go back, and I need to do so. I'm going to use, what I know about the French resistance to help arm and mobilize them for what's going to be the Allied invasion of the South, like Dragoon and Anvil, right? So people think of D-Day as like, oh, then it's the beginning of the end. It's like, well, there's like a lot that has to happen once this sweeping operation happens, and in order to make that more successful and efficient, and hopefully at the cost of far fewer lives lost in the process, the French resistance, it's this question of you have all these people willing to fight. They're in the mountains. They're all over the place. How do you organize them? And so Ortiz actually got permission to organize Operation Union 2. This is the team that jumps in with him. So he's there, and then he's recruited these people you see here. Sadly, one of them's missing because this is August 2nd, 1944. The day before, they parachuted in. By the way, they parachuted in with, not only themselves, there are these mostly Marines who he's recruited because he saw them in England and was like, they're paratroopers, they know how to jump. They were jump instructors. He also recruited Francis Coolidge, who's a captain in the Air Force, who's seconded to the OSS. And so they together are really, this team of ad hoc commandos that Ortiz says we're going to go behind enemy lines together. And we're going to, with the drop, when they drop in on August 1st, 1944, this is the second of a series of four really large aerial supply daylight drops to the French resistance. They are dropping from 78 B-17 Liberators that sweep down to 500 feet altitude and drop in the southeast, where people are very happy to see not only as agents but parachutes that are carrying canisters that open up with supplies. So they drop more than 150 tons of supplies. And so again, sadly, one of their comrades loses their life, OSS Marine Charles Perry, who had volunteered for this mission. On the jump, his parachute doesn't deploy properly. So amid all of this, they have all these supplies coming down. People are thrilled to see them, but obviously, traumatized to see one of these American men die in the process. They bury him. They keep going over the next 2 weeks through the mountains and through southeast France with the idea that, again, the resistance, the believed battalion they're working with is led by Captain Jean Bouilly, who's a very famous French resistant in the area, who will see a very sad, untimely death pretty soon after this. And they are, running into all sorts of hiccups, like as happens in this context of rugged mountain warfare. There are retreating Germans and there are advancing Germans all around them. And they run in. They have in mid-August, 2 weeks into this mission, they get split into two groups. It's Ortiz, a free French officer named Joseph Arslan, who's wearing the uniform of the dead Marine, so sort of pretending that he's an American Marine despite not speaking any English, which we'll get to later. And then these two other OSS Marines that Ortiz has recruited, John Bodnar and Jack Ristler, they're here in this picture. So again, you have about half this team finding themselves surrounded in this, as they enter this village called Centron. And Centron becomes a very important part of Ortiz's story, because what you have is, in mid-August, this scene where the villagers of Centron are keenly aware, very, very sensitive to the fact that just days earlier, Montgerot is another village that when the Allied soldiers passed through, Montgeroux, the Nazis were so, maddened by this whole, passage of Allied soldiers that they razed the village and they burned it to the ground. And so again, you have these people of Saint-Tron realizing their tiny little village with a church, and some modest houses will be razed if Ortiz and his men go through. And Ortiz and his men are aware of this. They're taking in the context of this historical moment and know that these innocent civilians are in danger just by them being there. Ortiz also knows that he can probably escape. So it's 3 versus 100 plus Germans with machine guns. But they put up a good fight, and they're sort of nimble and well-trained commandos, and they see a path to getting out. But Ortiz does not see a path to getting out that would lead to the village, existing after he went through it. He needs to go through Saint-Tron. He's not going to go through Saint-Tron. He decides in this really pivotal moment that I hope you'll, read more about, because I think it's an incredible story and display of moral courage. He says he's not going to force the couple men with him, his men. He says he'll cover for them. It's this decision point where he decides he's ready to know that he's going to try to negotiate his own surrender, in order to negotiate that the German officers agreed to spare the town. So he's going to try. And he asks John Bodnar and Jack Rissler, and again, Joseph Arslan, who's with him, I'll cover for you. Do you want to escape? And then I will do this. And they say, no, sir, we're Marines, whatever you do, we will do. And again, this moment of leadership where he did not force them into a decision, but he led by example and they followed, and toward what they thought was their death. He's 31 years old, newly at this point, and he gets up, walks in, he's yelling, he has a white cloth of sorts to show surrender, yet still being shot at. It's kicking dirt up at his feet and his boots, but he keeps walking towards the commander in charge. He's looking for, who he can talk to. He's shouting in German, French, and English at this point. So imagine being one of these townspeople witnessing this scene, who we later hear their recounting of it. A woman throws herself at him, and he sort of places her aside, to stop him from this grand gesture that is, again, he's willing to sacrifice his life. And, spoiler alert, he lives. So without going on and taking all of everyone's time to play out the story, he does successfully negotiate his own surrender, and he does not get funneled into the OSS agent treatment that he is sure he'll be subject to. He's one of the Gestapo's most wanted. Of course, he'll be recognized. For a variety of theories, it ends up funneled into sort of that prisoner of war circuit with John Bodnar and Jack Rissler and Joseph Arslan, and they go on for 8 to 9 months, many escape attempts, and a rough but survivable imprisonment. And they live to tell the story of how they saved Saint-Tron.
This is why your work and Mr. Reynolds' work is so important. It's not only because of the aspect of the war itself, the soldier who he was, but also the man and the honor he displayed in combat, offering his own life to preserve. It's unimaginable, nowadays, this level of courage and being so selfless, right?
Yeah.
This is my mission. Not only him, but the men who were with him, and actually, it's a good opportunity to highlight the work of the resistance in general.
Yeah.
I was in the beaches of Operation Dragoon this last January, and I shared with you some pictures of the monuments for the resistance there, because without the resistance, more lives would be lost during the process. But anyways.
Yeah, I also want to highlight the French people do an amazing job of, honoring, memorializing this history. You've seen it too, and I was just in France, for the Union 2, Operation Union 2, these August 1st jump anniversary and the surrender. And Saint-Tron, this town, this village in France, does not forget what happened there. Their town plaza has been renamed Place Peter Ortiz. There's a big picture of him and memorial to Charles Perry, who lost his life. And I really want to commend, people who have kept these memories and pieces of history alive for us to be able to share. People who, are connected to it directly and not. And it's really important and amazing.
Yeah, it's incredible. Like, it's really good. Good to know also that the city of Saint Home still honors and remembers um, the possible sacrifice he was willing to make. Thankfully, he escaped and lived on to tell the story and
Yeah.
be on that radio show and everything. Let me ask you one thing that just came to my mind here. There, am I tripping, or is there a picture of them in uniforms during they are burying the man
Yes.
who died during the jump? There is. So
Yeah.
who's the photographer? How did they get those pictures?
Yeah. I'm glad
I'm
you asked
asking.
because
Sorry to interrupt you. I'm asking you that because the people who are buying the book are going to be able to see what she's telling here. So you're going to be able to see or follow her on Instagram. The link you can find here in the description. So yeah,
yeah,
tell
well,
us about the picture and who's the photographer. What was going on?
thank you. Yeah, no, it's really amazing to me that in this book we're able to include pictures that are, from not only from the movies Ortiz was in, but also from these unimaginable to have a camera scenes in France. However, here's my grandpa's fake ID card. You have these photos of August 1st and 2nd after the jump. And like you said, there's a funeral where photographers, in war plus funeral, just not these aren't common combinations, so it's pretty special that we have this. I'm also glad you asked who the photographer was because I think it's we talk a lot about the photos, but not often how they came about. We also have photos of the parachute drops, so these sweeping images that aren't military photos. There are some military photos, but there's this. The answer is there's a photographer named Raymond Bertrand who is also resistant. This is a French member of the Maquis who's volunteering to serve, who owns a photo shop. And he is a photographer, and his photo shop is used as a safe house. It gets blown. There's a lot of horrible drama and repercussions to his service and bravery, but he survives. His camera continues to be put to use. And he uses it to give us photos like these, where you see, but the photo you're referring to is actually the photo that brought my co-author and me together, I would say. So Nick Reynolds, again, he is a retired Marine Corps colonel. He got his PhD in history at Oxford. He's a historian, and he had worked at the CIA, where there's a history of the Forerunner organization that Ortiz was the most battle decorated member of the OSS. And so in learning about a Marine in Europe, Nick's a Marine, and this is an OSS Marine story, he sees this photo and this article written by a former colleague of his, a historian named Bennis Frank, who highlights in a Journal of Military Past, I believe it is, this photo of this funeral that Raymond Bertrand has taken to just bring everyone back to this moment that we think about a lot. It's August 1st, 1944. They've just parachuted in on this harrowing mission and lost a friend, a colleague, a 22-year young Marine who has, laid down his life in the process of this mission. And instead of, very quickly running towards, cover, they plan a funeral, and they being the French resistance plus these agents, Ortiz and his men, one of whom, by the way, is badly injured from the jump as well. Robert LaSalle is standing here in this picture. We sort of decided he has a cane behind him, like a makeshift cane that he's hiding in the photo. So again, he's in bad shape. He's right here. His back is broken. His feet are,
You
he's been
can
knocked
see it. You can
unconscious.
see his
You
laying like.
can, but you can also see that he was not going to miss his friend's funeral. And so you have, again, the photos are in the book. Raymond Bertrand photographed. It's beautiful. It's full military honors. Again, like I said, Nick is a retired Marine colonel and understands sort of the gravity of, losing someone you're with in a combat situation. And I think Nick also understands that it's not always going to be possible to hold a funeral with full military honors in the middle of the field in uniform in occupied France, no less. Yet, some woman stayed up all night sewing an American flag and a French flag that they put over this casket, and there's flowers, there's a memorial, and they bury him. And I'm so glad we have the photos, because otherwise I think I'd be like, I don't believe it. Says, there's no AI here. This has really happened. And so while it's completely tragic, I think Nick was taken by the leader who has time and the wherewithal to have this gesture, and show of respect for a fallen comrade. And so I think, again, Nick still had that photo on his desk. We talk about it in the book, when I came calling many years later, saying, do you want to talk about Peter Ortiz? And he did. So again, Charles Perry's death is such a sad thing. And again, you see this in these high stakes moments. Ortiz exemplifies this courage that I think we can, all learn from, and hopefully even channel a bit today.
It is. It is. When I saw, well, the story itself is amazing, but when I saw the pictures, I was like, all right, we have material. We can see the
Yeah.
things that happened and
And what they're
the way they
wearing,
happened.
all of it. I was just talking about how, they sort of have like Army airborne issue uniforms. Like they're not, wearing, there weren't like a ton of Marine uniforms lying around OSS headquarters in Europe. So there's a lot of things about this that you look at and you say, huh? But I think that's all the more reason that we should look at it.
That's true. Insane. Like they could, like, I think it's in the article. I think it's you who wrote it, that he could just have left the body. Nobody would be like nobody would judge him for doing that because that's part of the mission. But they decide to go for the funeral and all in full uniform and displaying courage beyond any. And remember, guys, this is occupied friends. This is
Yeah.
behind enemy lines. These guys are playing a whole funeral in uniforms for a fallen comrade. This is the level of honor we are talking here. But yeah, um, another thing I would like to ask you, like from your perspective as someone who researched so much about Peter. Like he was decorated many times with many some of the highest decorations someone can get the honor to be awarded, and still we are discovering this story just now. Like we talk a lot, of course, Audie Murphy. We talk about Chesty Puller. We talk a lot
Yeah.
about I don't know, John Basilone and all those guys. And here's Peter Ortiz, who's as brave as those guys were. And why do you think the story it's coming to light? Just now, of course, it has a lot to do with your work and Mr. Reynolds, of course.
No, no.
But
We're building off of work people have done for many years. And I think that you're right that, again, I wouldn't have known Peter Ortiz's name. I hope now more people know his name, and that, Glenn Powell or Austin Butler will become interested in being cast as him in a great Steven Spielberg, Tom Hanks biopic. But anyways, short of that, I think, again, there's a 1949 radio episode. There's headlines of articles that say, he was the Widowmaker. There's a great book by a woman named Laura Lacey, who it's called To Live a Man's Life, about Ortiz. There have been efforts to tell his story. If you go to the Marine Corps Museum in Quantico, which I recommend that everyone, if you have a chance, do in Virginia, you can, see some of his medals and his movie posters. And I think, again, in certain circles, Ortiz's legend, but we're also talking an OSS story. We're also talking records that didn't get declassified for many years. We're talking a story that is almost hard to believe in its how wild it is. There's a Marine now named Captain Isaac Lamberth who works in public affairs at the Marines in the U.S., and he has done some great work. He wrote a book called Overshadowed, which I think in and of itself in the title, I think you've actually probably shared, yeah.
we are bringing him here.
Great.
We are.
So I'm going to give a
Isaac,
plug
you're
and a
going to be
nod
here.
to Isaac. And now it's happening. You should tune in too, because his book is sort of a coffee table compilation of not only Ortiz, but stories of other American Marines who were, in some ways overlooked or underknown. And he really focuses on people who were Marines who served outside of the Pacific in World War II, because like we said, you think of Marines, you think of Iwo Jima, because that was where most were. And so when you have these one-offs or exceptions, there are some really exceptional stories, but they're often not part of the larger narrative that we learn in our textbooks. But again, I think Isaac's book is a great addition to the collection because it does talk about Marines in the Caribbean. It talks about Marines like Ortiz, including Ortiz in Union 2 in Europe. Talks about people outside of the realm of the really important roles that Marines played in the Pacific in World War II as well.
Yeah, Isaac will be here for sure. He talks even about Marines planning an invasion of Brazil, but let's keep it to that episode.
It's a good. I can't
Um,
wait to watch.
yeah, thank you. Well, if you came all the way to this point of the episode, don't forget to subscribe and check out all the links here in the description of this episode. Katie, we are walking towards the end of our interview. We still have two questions. I would like to ask you, um, how was like talking more a little bit about the production of the book, like how the book was written. Um, you wrote it with Mr. Reynolds, which is someone who maybe could come to the show as well. But anyways,
Yeah, I'm
uh,
sure he'd love to.
and yeah, like how was the process of creating and writing this book? It all started with the article, right? And you guys
Yeah,
connected and you wrote the book. Can you tell us a little bit about the process of researching and writing the book?
yeah. I think the article is a test for us in many ways. So Nick and I again met through. I reached out. I'm a journalist. I reached out to the CIA, Central Intelligence Agency, in um, Virginia, saying I'm interested in Peter Ortiz. I have this personal connection and interest. I write about OSS history a lot. And they said, yeah, again, you got to meet Nick. And at this point, Nick is, had only recently left the CIA as their historian, and he had worked a lot on the museum they have there of the OSS personnel and history. And so again, we had lots to chat about, but that's different from going from chatting and geeking out about research to like, should we get into this long-term relationship of writing a book? And Nick had written books before, including Writer, Sailor, Soldier, Spy, which is a great Hemingway biography that I highly recommend. The title says a lot. He had written a book called Need to Know that is also a really captivating history of the OSS, America's intelligence organization. But he, didn't come into our conversation saying, I want to write a book about Ortiz. I think I came into our conversation saying, should we explore sharing Ortiz's story? Because how can we tell more people about it? And again, he's a Marine and a historian and CIA alumni. I'm a journalist with, real interest in World War II France and this personal connection. And so together we decided that, the story we wrote for Smithsonian a couple years ago about Ortiz opens with my great grandmother, Anna Simon, getting the telegram that my grandfather, her son who's been shot down is, alive and safe and, no need to worry. And then we pull back into the Ortiz story. And I think that's a good representation of sort of like the intersection of Nick and my styles where, for me, I want to know how did the French resistance feel when they received, these agents and supplies and saw their dead Marine, that they were burying too. And I think Alex Kershaw gave us he's an amazing writer and historian. And his blurb of our book that he kindly gave after reading it was, this is a tender, beautifully told story of an American hero we should all know about kind of thing. And I think the tender part for me is, what I was with Nick was like, tender, huh? I'm a military historian, that's not the usual language. And so I think together, we have footnotes and endnotes. Nick kept to the, fundamentals of what he knows as a historian, but I tried to really bring in, some more narrative and character building and, Rissler is a guy who likes beer and, LaSalle is a small town Michigan boy. Like, what are these things that can help us understand not only who these guys were on paper, but how it felt to be them or to be with them, and what was on the line. So again, I think Nick would say, he did a lot of the fundamental we did a research together in many years, and a good combination of interviews and oral histories and these tapes that, no one had known really existed, and the This Is Your Life episode, and Marine archives, OSS archives. But when it came down to, the writing, Nick would put a draft on paper, and I would say, let's show, don't tell. And he'd say, okay. And, we'd go back and forth like that. And it's been a true, process to get what's turned into the book you see here, which, again, is something we're proud to share together.
Yeah, you should be. Like, writing a book by itself is something unbelievable, and writing about a historical topic like that, it's even like more incredible. Like, so
Well, Nick
congratulations
I
for
would
the
say,
work.
thank you. Nick, I would say, is our voice of reason, who is, like, all right, like, let's turn, I could spend years researching more than we did. And I was like, all right, let's be, concrete about this and get the chapters down. So I nod to him for keeping us on track.
That's brilliant. I'll be honest, this is what I'm currently reading. And so far, amazing. It's a great story. Like,
Thank
even the
you.
article that will be here in the description of this episode is amazing. So yeah, very, very good job, guys.
Oh, thank
And
you.
it's a
I would say,
story that deserves it.
I always say to people, if you like read this book and think it's boring, then we did something really wrong, because Ortiz was anything but boring. And in a lot of ways, our job is to just get out of the way and let his actions speak. But there's so much that, deciding where it starts and stops. He was also one of the earliest members of Toys for Tots, the Marine, very common U.S. nonprofit that delivers toys to at-need families and kids in the holidays. And so again, like, these are all these things that you could, spend a lot of time and real estate getting into. And so it's been, I think one of the hardest parts is figuring out, where we don't go deep, and save it for another article, maybe.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah. So the last question usually is the same, like goes towards the same direction. So what do you expect, or better, what do you think is Peter's legacy to the younger generations, people who read this book at the age of 18, 17, I don't know, and what do you think it's his legacy? What does he leaves to this world?
Yeah, well, I know now there's talk of our 18-year-olds, 17-year-olds, or anyone even going to be reading books anymore. And I think the answer is, this was someone who was very well read, and that was his way of being plugged into the world. It's also someone who was, again, really oriented towards serving others and using their privilege, on whatever level he had it. It's a little Spider-Man-y to be like, with great privilege comes great responsibility, but I honestly think it sort of is that simple. We talk about the greatest generation. We talk about, this climate in which Nick and I talk about there's this whole, like, that's not my problem crowd, or like, if I just, pretend I don't see that people are being rounded up by, they're not, or, again, he was the antithesis of that. And so I hope that people find that contagious or inspiring, at least, and that they remember that, the freedom and the agency that they have, isn't just a privilege, but it's something that they can, deploy in their own lives, in military contexts or in everyday life contexts. I think I anytime I'm, fretting over something, I try to channel the courage or bravery, and it really is courage, because it's with heart, right? The French word for courage is, has heart in it, and he's someone who operated with great courage. And so I hope people take that.
And that's amazing. That's why we are all here to tell the stories, like I was telling you before. Once these people, these men are gone, we are the ones who will be here telling their stories and telling the world the great deeds they performed, and
that we reap the benefits of too, right? Like, this was not like, um, semantics. This was like a true fight for the freedoms that, I certainly feel privileged to enjoy today, or, being able to exist, freely. And I want young Marines to read this book and remember, or feel connected to, really a founding father in some ways, who was, you know, orienting towards doing the right thing.
And yeah, so this is the end of our conversation here, unfortunately. And before we go, I would like to highlight the greatness of the Marine Corps as an institution and everything they contributed, not only during World War II, but afterwards, and all the battles they faced and never gave up. And it's just a great institution made of great men. Katie, do
And
you have
women
any
now.
final and women? Exactly.
Which
Which,
again, not at the time. But I would also say the only thing I would add is if you are a Marine, or you're connected to a Marine who you think would appreciate this book, reach out to me and I will make it my mission to find a way to, share it with you, because as much as I want to sell lots of books, I would most importantly want to, have people who want access to the story, and this history to have it. So any Marines out there, please reach out. And, again, at Ortiz's War Book on Instagram is a quick way to get in touch.
yeah. So, do you have any final considerations about the book? Just to let people know, stay tuned to our social media, not only ours at the World War II Daily, but also Katie's. The links again will be here in the description of this episode, not only for our Instagrams, but also all the books Katie mentioned and the article where you're going to learn a bit more about Ortiz. But the book is where you want to go if you want to learn the details of this brilliant story. Like all this interview, I don't need to say anything about it. It's like if this interview doesn't convince you it's a great story, I'm sorry, you're out of this world. Katie, any final considerations?
Just a big thank you for, again, sharing this story and for all the stories you share. And I look forward to continuing to tune in and follow along too.
So yeah, don't forget to subscribe. Thank you again for coming all the way to the end of another episode here at the World War II Daily Podcast. Big shout out to Samuel, who's not here with us, but we love you. We all see you on the next episode. Thank you very much, and bye bye.